Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome. My name's GBay99. I hope you all are having a wonderful day. Today, we're back with another discussion video where we'll be talking about the big mid-season update for tanks that just came out, patch 7.9. This patch has been particularly interesting for top laners since a lot of things that were standard for builds, items, and strategies before this patch are now no more with all the item changes that have happened. Like, you know how I dedicated a whole 2 videos to talking about how Titanic Hydra went over a tipping point where it was now efficient to build on Aurelia? Well, since this patch, it has almost certainly gone back over that tipping point where it is no longer a standard item that you should build. There are many better options out there available to you. But anyway, let's go ahead and jump right in, starting off with talking about some of the basic stuff surrounding this update. The big focus of this mid-season update was supposed to be tanks, updating and changing how tanks work since they have been wreaking havoc on League of Legends for quite some time now. 3 champions in particular, Sejuani, Zac, and Maokai, all received big updates, pretty much being the only champions to do so, although there were some updates that we may talk about in another video in the future. But this video really isn't about all that, so all you really need to know about these reworked champions were as follows. Always ban this one, please don't play this one, he's been nerfed really hard, and this one is probably the closest to being balanced, although he's still a little weak. The most exciting parts of this patch weren't actually any sort of champion updates or reworks, it was the item changes that happened. 2 new items have been added that seem fairly interesting. Adaptive Helm, which gives health, magic resistance, and a passive that's supposed to help you tank mage champions' abilities. It's a kind of bad item that people seem to think not many are building it, but we've been needing more MR items since Riot removed Force of Nature, so I appreciate the attempt. And Gargoyle's Stoneplate is the other item, which has the old GA build of Chain Vest and Negatron Cloak, but a much more interesting active that now lets you gain bonus health and reduce damage with an added bonus if there's a lot of champions nearby you for a few seconds. It's an unusual tank item that I kind of like the idea of, and it's actually been fairly popular. You'll see this in a number of games. As cool as this new stuff is though, the really interesting things that were updated this patch and may have landmark changes on how many champions are played were distinctions and reworks to already existing items where Riot fixed a lot of problems that many people may not have noticed coming up if you weren't playing tanks or bruisers. For instance, Randuin's Omen and Deadman's Plate had a terrible problem where Omen was always outclassing Deadman's Plate. They had the exact same health, Randuin's gave slightly more armor, but on top of that, Randuin's had a much better passive and active for most champions, so you would normally always build it on certain champions like Aurelia, and you would never go for Deadman's Plate over it, even if there wasn't all that much critical damage on the enemy team. Riot tweaked a lot of little problems this patch, like in this case, they gave Randuin's less health, but more critical strike damage reduction, as well as buffing Deadman's Plate's armor and active, so both items now have strengths and weaknesses. One is simply not outclassing the other. There's also been some updates to drastically change how other items work. We won't get to every one of them in this video, but GA is maybe one of the most obvious. It's no longer a straight tank item that you build with Chain Vest and Negatron Cloak. It's now an AD item that's built with BF Sword and Cloth Armor. This will eliminate that old 5-man GA Gambit strategy, and it will potentially make it a pretty good item for a second or third buy on some AD champions. It's also something that you're not going to have to worry about unkillable tanks getting anymore. With so many tiny updates to so many different items, it's kind of difficult to go through each one and talk about how it might change things, so let's take a look at some of these changes in an individual's build, picking a champion completely at random and seeing how their build might be updated now, and let's just randomly pick Aurelia. Credit to this guy, Kid Barrier Ignite, for cluing me in on this one. This dude is a high diamond player who always takes Barrier and Ignite top lane, and he mains Aurelia as well. I played against him in a game where he took Aurelia from me and then BM'd me every single time he killed me with those stupid annoying summoners, so naturally I added him after the game to flame him, but it turns out that he's a pretty cool guy who watches my videos, so we're friends now. Anyway, he clued me in on how a lot of these little buffs and nerfs here and there may change every standard item that Aurelia builds past Triforce. To recap, Aurelia's standard build for literally years was Triforce into tank, as you all probably know. You maybe threw a second damage item in there like Blade of the Ruin King if you were ahead with a couple of kills early on, maybe Ghostblade when Ghostblade was an overpowered item, and when Titanic Hydra set up to be viable as an item 6 months ago after some changes to those other items, its previously weak stats made it a great option with the split pushing potential that now makes it a core item, but there may be some interesting buffs to other items that could change all this. Currently it's being suggested by Kid Barrier Ignite as well as a couple other Aurelia players players that for your build, you still go for Triforce first, obviously, but all the tank stats that you really need can be bought through two items, Ninja Tabi and Spear of Visage. Ninja Tabi was already a super OP item against all AD champions and gives you a ton of damage reduction, but Spear of Visage got an interesting buff where it has a little less health but more magic resistance, and more importantly, 5% more healing received. This is a win-win situation for Aurelia, since trading health for resistances makes your heals more effective. Lots of health is really bad for healing champions, whereas lots of resistances are much better, and this also gives you even more healing on top of that. Just these two items, with the typical Rune and Mastery setup that most people are running, should give you around 52% physical damage reduction and 52% magic damage reduction, with around 100 armor and 100 MR at levels 12 to 13. Two items are all you need for your tank stats. Now, rather than going for more tank items afterwards, you can go for some odd DPS items that will still make it more difficult to kill you or 1v1 you. Sterix Gage, for instance, got a pretty massive buff and is a core item that you're going to be building next. It got a buff on the base attack damage that it gives you as a flat stat, going from 25% bonus AD to 30%. The bonus AD on the Fury's active also went up from 25% to 40%. On top of that, the Lifeline passive gives you 75% bonus health as a shield rather than 30% max health, which is a tweak that's going to have great scaling into the late game, and the damage that you get is pretty insane. On top of that, if you have to go up against a tank, you can build a Blade of the Ruin King next, which is already a super strong item, as I'm sure you guys know, and it only received a slight nerf this patch of costing 100 gold more. Keep in mind, Blade of the Ruin King was buffed in patch 7.6 to have less attack speed and more attack damage, so it has a lot more attack damage, and that bonus AD that you get will also increase your AD again with the bonus AD percentage of Sterix Gage. It cycles into itself. With this item setup, you get a pretty crazy amount of damage, good teamfight survivability, solid 1v1 potential against both squishy and tanky champions, and you should scale into the late game better than normal without having to do a split push gimmick. This is just one example, by the way, of a single champion whose build is getting turned on its head by all of these changes. I bet other people who play similar fighters, bruisers, and juggernauts are also experimenting with their own build changes, and I honestly find it really exciting. This is a theory crafting period where it's like the Wild West. Anything goes and nobody knows what's best. I'd actually advise you to be a little careful in ranked if you choose to play right now, as games in ranked are getting super swingy, as you may have noticed. There aren't too many close matches going on. It's typically a stomp in either one direction or the other, as people are just trying to do the same old stuff from last patch, and those people struggle a lot more, whereas early adopters of these new strategies can get a handle on how everything's going and is getting mixed up, and they'll have a pretty big edge, increasing their win rate by quite a bit. Maybe the thing I like most about this new patch, though, was all of these sweeping changes came from the little details rather than the big reworks. Even though 3 new champion updates came into the game, 2 whole new items, and some significant reworks to older items, the most impactful changes for bruisers, juggernauts, and tanks were from the little bit less health here and the plus 5 AD there. I'm really interested in seeing what the new norms become from here on out. Things might start shaking up quite a bit, or I could be wrong. Thank you all very much for watching, good luck in solo queue, and have a wonderful day.